Hello and welcome to the very first episode of The Interviews from These Three Media. Each week join me, Ian Barstow, Damien Lee and Darren Antrobus as we talk to interesting people with really interesting stories to tell. Coming up in this season of The Interviews, we have, so far, interviews from Simon Dunn, we've got the Bold Builders, Chrissy Rock, Stevie Ritchie, Justine Riddock and many more. All of those coming up over the next few weeks. But first, from me, an interview with Lord Michael Cashman. Make sure I am recording.
Let me turn my front door buzzer off.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Phone line's out, door buzzer's off. Wonderful.
So, hello, welcome to this episode of The Interviews, and I am very happy today to be joined by Lord Michael Cashman. Hello. Is it Lord or is it Michael or...?
It's Michael. I'm still waiting for them in the House of Lords to tap me on the shoulder and say, "Excuse me, sir, could you come outside? We meant the other Lord Cashman."
Welcome to the interviews, and thank you so much for joining us today. First of all, you've got your paperback version of your memoirs is out now. By the time this goes out, and it's called One of Them: From Albert Square to Parliament Square. So really, when did you decide to write that memoir? Did you do it in sort of like one big, I'm going to give myself 6 months to do it, or was it a long-term process of stuff that you've been writing down for years that you've put together?
Ian, it's interesting because I wanted about 15 years ago to write what they call an autobiography, really, because I've had such a varied and amazing life, and most of it by chance, and so I started on those long train journeys I used to take going to the European Parliament, and I didn't really get anywhere. They were ramblings, and then when Paul, my late husband, died, I knew I wanted to put my life down on paper. I had to record it. And so I just set out to write it. I gave myself a few months, and I was so fortunate in that the second draft my agent sent to Bloomsbury, and something happened there. They first of all said, "We don't think it's for us," and then Alexandra Pringle, the editor-in-chief, called me in 4 months later and said, "We can't stop thinking about your memoir. So if we asked you, would you do another draft?" And that was manna from heaven, if an atheist can say that, because suddenly you're given a space in which somebody wants you to create rather than you just creating. And when I say create, that's exactly what you do, because all of the memories there. And interestingly, in your question, part of the answer is there. I went back to diaries, I went back to notes, which I'd kept, and reflections, which I kept over the years. But I went back after a couple of drafts to check the veracity of them. And when I say create, you have to have the courage to let go. You can't be prescriptive. You've got to sit down and know that there's a part of your life you want to examine, and let the writing do it for you. So, and that's why I have to say, hand on heart, I absolutely stand by every single word of this memoir. The outrageousness, the darkness, the sadness, the vivacity, I stand by it all. And I've been so lucky to have the publisher that I've got.
Is there anyone that you that was included in the autobiography that you had to pre-warn that this particular story or this particular episode was going to appear in it, and did any of them sort of go, yeah, can you perhaps edit slightly?
There was only uh, one person. And that wasn't because of the outrageousness, although there's quite a few outrageous things in there. um, uh, and that was Ian McKellen. I said to Ian, I said, come on, you feature so much in this book. Have a read of it. And if there's anything you don't like, I'll take it out, maybe. And he came back to me and he said, I wouldn't ask you to alter a word, not one single word. And then wrote a lovely thing for the cover, called it a memoir to cherish. And because in the end, you've got to be fairly brutal. Otherwise, Alan Ayckbourn, who I worked with when I wrote a play for him to direct, he gave me a brilliant piece of advice, which is you can never write by committee.
You've got to be from the heart, hasn't it?
Yeah, and it does mean that you might upset people, and there are people who think they should have been included, and people who wish they hadn't or viewed it differently. And that's the other interesting thing, which is two people can be in the same meeting and leave and each have a different perception about that meeting. So I hope I've dealt with it fairly and honestly, but some of those who did some terrible things to me are named.
Which is I think that's sometimes why people like autobiographies, because they don't. We see a persona from the public, so people will know you from EastEnders and from your political work, but we don't know the details of what goes on, and that's, I think, a good biography, because some you read and you just think they weren't written by the person. It's all third hand, and just some of them are like, you almost want them just to go that little bit further to make it a bit more. This is why I am the person I am, and they sort of skip over bits.
I think some people have, developing that line, some people have been amazed at how honest I have been. 2 days ago, I had a text message from the partner of a really good friend, and she said, I finally read your book. I couldn't put it down. And she said, I can't remember when a book last affected me as much as this. And I think when you look at the public persona, you have to know what that person's been through, because what I'm trying to say in the book is that no matter what happens to you in life, you can become yourself. You can. And part of that was, undoing the darkness and allowing myself to be loved. I didn't think I could be loved. And finding someone and going through the most amazing relationship, that was problematic in itself. And developing our own space. And again, that's another recurring theme for me. Claim your space in the world, and not the space that is loaned to you by being somebody that you're not.
Yeah. Which I think as a gay person, I think every gay person goes through a very similar journey, in the fact that when you first realized yourself that you're a gay person, and then you accept that yourself, and then you go through the whole thing of the coming out, the telling everybody, and then sort of literally, it's like, I remember when I came out, it was like a massive weight just gone off the shoulders.
Yes.
And you just sort of go, this is who I am, and for once I can actually be who I am rather than half the person that I am. Yes. Because you're hiding it.
It's exactly that. Half the person that I am, hiding. And you know what? People are aware that something is being hidden.
Yes.
Ian McKellen said, before he became famous for Gandalf and all of that, in the mid-'80s, when Margaret Thatcher was pushing, the Conservative government of Margaret Thatcher was pushing through the first anti-lesbian and gay law in 100 years. And Ian decided to come out. But people said to him, no, don't come out. You'll lose your career. And Ian said, when he came out, he said, it was like the scales falling away. And you know what? He became a better actor because he could allow people right the way in, and not part of the way in. And the other thing, again, something you just said about coming out to yourself, so important. Sometimes we come out to ourselves and we need a lot longer before we come out to others. But coming out to yourself is an amazing leap forward. And also what most people don't realize is you have to come out repeatedly.
Every day.
Because people, it's changing, but people make assumptions. And I remember, this shows you, if I'm going on too long, tell me to shut up. But I went to Pembroke College, Cambridge, sat at high table. Chris Smith, Lord Smith, the first openly gay member of Parliament. He's the master of Pembroke. And on high table, you're sat there, and the man on my left said, "So where do you live?" And I told him where I lived. And he said, "Oh, did you move there with your lady wife?" And I said, "No, I moved there with my husband, who died a few years ago." He said, "Oh, very good." He said, "I've just moved in with my husband to a new place." And I thought, brilliant. The days of, he was being polite, but the days of that heterosexual convention always having to be respected. No, we can respect love in all of its different forms.
And I think people don't even realise it in it. But even if I remember I phoned up, I think it was Sky Television, and as they have their chatter when they're trying to sell you something, and they go, "Oh, and does your wife like movies?" And you think, "No, but my partner does."
Yeah.
Not husband yet, but my partner does.
It's interesting you say that, because a journalist recently said to me, what is the thing that really excites you about equality? And I said, well, a lot of people don't have it. Trans women, trans men, trans teenagers, amongst them. I said, but I said is brilliant. I said, is when the difference is taken out of the equation. I said, and the other day, watching television, watching The Chase, and this woman said, "Oh, I knew the answer to that question because my husband is interested in blah, blah, blah." And the man that she was in competition with, whatever they call it, I can't, but he said, "Yeah, I wish my husband was into that kind of subject." And I thought, that is when we've arrived, because 5:30 ITV, somebody just talks about their husband, and it's normal and ordinary and brilliant.
But we are still. There was a story about Cadbury's cream egg, their advert, and they had two men eating the egg from each other or something. I've not seen the advert, but I've read that, and it got 190 odd complaints or something, because people were disgusted by two men being on screen together. And it's like, we've come a long way, but we've still got quite a long way to go.
Well, the enemies of equality never go away.
They move on. I think a lot of it. They move on to another minority to. Right, we've lost our fight with that almost. We're going to move on now, particularly at the moment, trans rights and trans people.
But they return, because we look down through the millennia, and they return, but they return in different ways. Their attack becomes different. I'm not attacking you because you're a different kind of that minority. And as they misrepresent the trans community, they hold up the exception to represent the general. In the same way that they used to say gay men, they're all pedophiles, because there was one case that they could hold up, or a few cases of men who were attracted to young boys. No, they were pedophiles. And it's that it is the misrepresentation of minorities that is so dangerous.
So going back to the time when, so you were you're London born and bred, or London raised. You were, so 1950s, when you were born, or the 1950s, sorry, not the 1950s. So obviously when you were sort of in your formative years, in your teenage years, and you started to probably think about the fact that you found men attractive rather than, or men and women, or you sort of came to that conclusion yourself. What was it like in that era for you to, I presume you couldn't come out to family, friends at that time, or?
Well, I knew I was attracted to boys, some of the older boys and boys of my own age, when I was about 7 or 8.
Yeah.
And got on with it, and it's because it was the most natural thing in the world for me to fancy guys, and it's later that you learn guilt. It's later that you're told boys don't do that.
Yes.
You're informed at your earliest age. Oh, have you got a girlfriend? And so I knew, once I knew that it was frowned on, I knew I had to hide it. And certainly when I then went into my secondary modern school, where it was like a war zone in the East End of London. I mean, the East End was an incredible place to live. The docks, we lived right on the edge of the docks. It was thriving. It was exciting. The energy that was here and the mischief that you could get up to. And the rule was get up to whatever you want, but don't get caught. And I go up to a lot. But for me, what changed my life was, I didn't know it was illegal. I knew it was wrong. But when I was discovered by a talent scout, and I ended up in Oliver in the West End at the age of 12 years old, and I was in a world where I could belong, where I could be me, where there were other boys who fancied other boys. And I remember my dad said, when the talent scout said about me auditioning, my dad said to my mum, I don't want him going in show business, it's full of queers. And inside my little head I went, yes, I want to be there. And I mean it seriously, because 40 minutes to an hour on that bus, arriving at the East End of the Strand, seeing the lights of the theatres coming towards me, and I was in a world where I felt so at ease, where I could be myself, and it was incredible. And then, as a young actor, the age of consent came in 1967. I was 16 years old. I was going to gay bars, going to gay clubs, which a friend had introduced me to, this amazing world that existed only in the darkness of night and always had to remain there because it was another world. And I had my first relationship with long-term relationship, which lasted for 9 years, with Lee, who was 8 years older than me. And I chased him down till I got him. And when we moved in together, he spelt it out to me. He said, we have to pretend to be cousins. There always has to be 2 single beds or 2 bedrooms. And that was the way we were for most of our time together.
So that's the 1967 Homosexual Act, I think it was called, wasn't it? Where you
yes.
It stopped being illegal, but you couldn't live together and you couldn't be found to be in the same bed together. Is that, or under the same house?
You could live together. It was the partial decriminalization, which meant that both men, it didn't deal with women. Both men had to be 21 years or over, and in a private residence, which meant if they were staying in somebody else's house, it would be illegal. In a hotel, it would be illegal. But equally, Ian, it was illegal to even try to meet another gay man. If you tried to pick someone up on the street, that was called soliciting for an immoral purpose or importuning, and people were arrested. And interestingly, after the partial decriminalization in 1967, the arrests actually went up. They didn't decrease; they went up right the way into the mid 1990s, because we were seen as an easy way of bumping up your success numbers for police constabularies. Look at the number of arrests that we've made. And in LGBT History Month of last February, I remarked that for most of my life, we didn't have LGBT History Month. Our history was only recorded in the darker pages of the scandal sheets and the tabloids. So there's been some wonderful changes, but it's very important to remember what we had to overcome and the effect that it had on many lives.
Well, you've had your moments in the tabloid press particularly with EastEnders. Obviously, you played Colin in EastEnders, and you were involved in the first gay kiss, which when I was doing research, I thought it was a proper sort of lip-on-lip kiss. It was a kiss on the forehead.
Yep.
Which is like, really?
I tell you, when 1986, I went into the show. I met Paul in 1983. Interestingly, Barbara Windsor introduced us. We were both working up there in Scarborough, and he was 19, below the age of consent. But when I went into that show, AIDS and HIV was at its peak. It was depicted in the tabloids as, I quote, the gay plague.
Yes. And
all sorts of stories. You could catch it by sitting next to a gay man, or a chair where a gay man had sat, etc., etc. But when I went into the show, there were questions in Parliament as to why a gay character was going into a family show, given that AIDS and HIV was, quote, swirling around the country. Then when we had the kiss, my God, the tabloids blew a gasket. Moral campaigners again wrote into the BBC.
Was that Mary Whitehouse?
Mary Whitehouse, so-called moral campaigner. And there were, in Parliament, they said, these characters must be taken out of the show or the show must be axed. And it was a peck on the forehead. But there are when I look now at the writing, there's some amazing writing there. There's a beautiful scene between Colin, my character, and Barry, played by Gary Hales, where Gary's worried about AIDS and HIV. And it's just the two of them, holding hands, Colin kissing Barry's hands and his wrist and reassuring him and talking. It's so loving. It's incredible. And we broke the sound barrier with the depiction of these men, Colin and Barry. They were in an illegal relationship because Barry was below the age of consent. I think Barry was 20 when they got together. And so that and the kiss and the depiction, they were groundbreaking. But equally, the lip-on-lip kiss in 1988, which in comparison to the first peck on the forehead, was a bit of a whimper, the reaction, which showed that if you were consistent in your approach to character and story, then people took it on because they were interested in the characters, they were interested in the story.
See, I think now that my first proper view of a gay person's life was Queer as Folk. That was my first on TV. That was the first thing I watched. I watched it in bedroom, on the TV, late at night, sound down, not watching it, but then I'll watch it. And it was that first look, and it was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And I remember the controversy around that at the time. But now you have It's a Sin, which has just finished, which was just phenomenally good. Cried my eyes out at that. But the depiction of the gay sex in that show was a lot more, not graphic, but was a lot more suggestive. It showed a lot more. But there was hardly a whimper of controversy surrounding it, because everyone was. I'm hoping that people have moved on. I think there's still an undercurrent of that homophobia. But I think now you've got Hollyoaks has gay couples in there without any issues and stuff like that. We've definitely moved on from your first gay kiss of a kiss on the forehead.
But we've moved on because of the work that was done during that very difficult time, and that people are now open. Their doctors are lesbian, gay, bisexual, maybe trans. It's because our lives are no longer as hidden or as secret as they had to be. We are a part of the normal fabric of daily life, and the country is better for it. People are better for it, and so therefore, when it happens on screen, it is a part of the life we live. But the writing of Russell T Davies is incredible. I mean, Queer as Folk, Cucumber, and then completely. I haven't really seen such beautiful writing as in It's a Sin. And what is wonderful about the writing is we know he's taking us on a journey that is going to end sadly. It doesn't end badly, far from it. And looking back again, as I said earlier, it's a powerful reminder of what we lived through and what people did to us and our community, and how we rallied and supported one another. And actually, with that anti-gay law that came in 1988, and AIDS and HIV, the combination of the two together, I believe, made our community and our allies, and I cannot underline that too often, our allies, that we came back and we thought, you want to fight? We'll give you a bloody fight. We lost the battle for Section 28, as it was called. It became law, but then we set out to win the war for equality, and we're still doing it. We're nearly there, but there are some worrying signs at the moment. But we've learned incredibly from those dark years, which is why we needed to revisit them with It's a Sin.
I thought, I don't cry a lot at TV and film. I don't think I've ever cried so much at a program than the final episode of It's a Sin. Particularly that bit on the beach. I won't spoil it if people haven't watched it. I think almost everyone has, but that bit on the beach where she tells it's just, and it's that silence that comes straight after it. And it just, I was sat there watching it, and it was like, oh my God, no. It was just like sucker punch in the chest. And then that was it. I was gone.
I had exactly the same reaction. I sat there and I went, no, literally, involuntarily, it came out. But I didn't get upset. I had a moment of when the pit of your stomach drops, and then the anger that I felt that somebody could do that. And that's why the writing is so remarkable, so beautiful.
Do you think that did your interest in politics and your interest in activism and your interest in justice and fighting for people's rights, do you think that was hardened and developed because you were a gay man living through that era where it was illegal for you to be gay, it was illegal for you to do this, illegal for you to have sex with men? Did that spur you on and give you the fire to think, do you know what, I need to change this?
Being absolutely honest, I don't know. But what I do know it is that I've always been moved by injustice. I've always found it deeply, deeply hurting. And we were brought up, me and my three brothers, on that housing estate council estate in Limehouse, brought up, and it was tough. But you didn't know it was tough because you had nothing to compare it to. But I joined the Labour Party in my mid-20s, and used to go out and help, deliver leaflets and that kind of thing. But I never thought I'd go into politics. I never thought I'd go into activism. Other people did that. People who went to university. I didn't complete my education. I left school really at the age of 12. And so I came to my activism through a sense of outrage that what was happening during the miners' strike. Paul and I, we had our, he was as political as me. He came from a mining community. We had our phone tapped during the miners' strike. Then with AIDS and HIV, seeing what was happening, seeing bars and clubs where we could take refuge to become ourselves, we could take refuge no more because death was in the corner. And what completely committed me was when Margaret Thatcher brought in that anti-gay law, anti-lesbian and gay law, hitting a community that was living with AIDS and HIV. It needed supporting. It didn't need suffocating.
Yeah.
And that was when I went on that march and got involved in the campaign. And then after the law went through, I said to Ian, come on, we've worked well together. We've got to set up an organization to make sure another Section 28 never happens again. And that's what we started to do. We started to form Stonewall and launched it a year later in 1989, May 1989. And I found that my passion was going into my politics, into equality. I'd found my voice, like that young boy who went into Oliver and found a space where he could become himself. I found a new space, and with it I found a voice that I wanted to use to speak out against the injustices and the horrors that they were visiting upon ordinary women and men because we happen to have a different sexual choice of partner.
See, I obviously know of Section 28, and I was born in 78, so it would have affected my schooling because it was introduced in there, and they couldn't teach homosexual practices homosexual life in schools.
That's right. For people listening, I should have said Section 28 said a local authority shall not promote homosexuality. Yes. And should not certainly do so in a maintained school, nor the acceptability of homosexual relations as pretend family relations. They didn't. If only you could promote a sexuality. I live in a predominantly heterosexual world. It hasn't been very good at promoting itself on me. And as I pointed out to someone, if you suggest that really you can promote someone into homosexuality, you're inferring that heterosexuality is rather fragile and a phase that you're going through. Absolute nonsense. It was pandering to the political right wing of the Conservative Party at the time, and it shouldn't have happened.
I always, when people sort of say, "Oh, when did you decide you were gay?" So I didn't decide I was gay. When did you decide you were straight? Yeah. Yes. You don't. So there you go.
The other thing, you've never tried it. You said, well, yeah, have you tried it? But my partner Paul, who I was with for 31 years when I first met him, he dated women and had a bit of a reputation in his town. But he found himself. He and I, in our early years, first of all, I pushed him away. I thought, no, someone has wonderful as this, can't love me. And if he does love me, then he'll hurt me. And he couldn't believe that I failed to understand how much he loved me. And a lot of that is also, Ian, I think when you're brought up being told that what you feel is bad and wrong. And that's the other lovely thing about Russell T. Davies writing in It's a Sin. Every so often the words would come up where the boys would say, Mummy, I didn't do anything bad. I didn't do anything to be ashamed of, anything dirty. Those three words kept popping up every so often, reminding us what negativity, enforced negativity, can do to some beautiful lives.
Yeah, no, exactly. So Stonewall is, I watched, because obviously there's the Stonewall Riots in America, and I watched the film that was done from that, which is just brilliant. It's such a quality film. And then obviously on this side, going back slightly with the miners' strike, we had the Pride marching, and they allied themselves with the miners and fundraised for them. And then the miners came on to the first Pride event, I believe, first Pride March. So Stonewall was set up, and it's still going now, and it's still a force for sort of gay rights and all that encompasses. Has it sort of? Are you still a member of Stonewall? Are you still on the board, or have you moved on from that now?
No, you're right about that history of LGBT people involving themselves in other struggles, and it was the first Pride March for the miners, and there's a brilliant bit in the film for those who haven't seen it. That I won't spoil it, but they should see it when the miners arrive for the Pride March. But when we set up Stonewall, one of its strengths, before I answer the question, is that we decided that it would have an equal number of women and men, because up until that time, lesbians and gay men had never really worked together that well. They pitted against one another. And so we formed the organization. I was the founding chair. But I knew after, I think it was about 6 years, that I had to let go. I had to get out, because I was facing, again, I deal with all of these things in the book, but I was facing burnout, being burnt out, and feeling that I was resenting it, but not wanting anybody else to do it. And I thought, I've got to get out, I've got to let go, otherwise I become dangerous to the organization and the organization's development. And that's exactly what I did. And the manner in which I announced it was quite amusing, but having the courage to let go is really important, especially as a founder, because if you're lucky, it then grows beyond your wildest dreams. And what I do remember is those early years, the opposition we had to Stonewall, the opposition we had from some LGBT activists who believed we shouldn't be doing it. Who were you? You're self-serving, self-electing. And I said, yes, absolutely right. We're after equality. If people want to opt out of equality, absolutely fine. And somebody said to me that Stonewall's going through a hard and difficult time at the moment. And I said, it always has. Campaigning organizations always have difficult periods, because what they're campaigning for, others want to resist.
Yeah.
And that's why you campaign and you stick at it. And I'm proud of the organization. I'm proud of what it's achieved. And I'm proud that it wants to do more.
So my partner Colin has an autograph from you. I met you at a nightclub in Stoke-on-Trent called the Excalibur,
where I sang
in the 1980s. Yes, and because his name's Colin, and he came up to you and sort of went, "Hello, I'm Colin," and you went, "Ah, another one." And he said he remembers you talking about I think about Section 28 at the time. And we tried to we can't find the autograph. It is somewhere. it sounds bad. It's not on the wall. It's not framed on the wall. But he remembers you from obviously from the 1980s. So what strikes a fire in you to go out and campaign and to face that resistance that you undoubtedly get on whatever issue you're campaigning on? Somebody will be, do you know what, will be against you. Do you sort of really enjoy that almost fight, but in a political way?
I get no enjoyment whatsoever. I face the fear. I face the bouts of a lack of confidence that I'm going to screw it all up. When I met Colin in Stoke-on-Trent, interestingly, an area that I went on to represent in the European Parliament, representing the West Midlands, I was still acting, and I think I was moving out of acting into activism. But what fires me up is that it's wrong to deny people equal protection of the law. It undermines law. It undermines our right to call ourselves civilized. And I see it now being done across other parts of the world where it shouldn't, because our rights should travel with us. They should be universal. They're universal human rights. And when I see it being done to trans women and trans men and trans teenagers who merely want to lead their lives, get on with their lives, be themselves, harming no one, I just don't understand. And it's turning that anger into a force for positive change. And I'm lucky in that I've been doing it in the House of Lords over the last few years, so that I've got the government to move forward, widening pardons and disregards. They're now taking it in the Armed Services Bill to army personnel and members of the Royal Marines who weren't previously covered. And then it's my intention, through another piece of legislation I got through, to deal with what we call historical convictions, which remain on people's record and prevent them getting certain types of employment for a crime that isn't a crime now and shouldn't have been a crime then. So it's always turning the anger into something positive. But I do doubt myself. But I've come to the conclusion that in public life, and certainly in politics, that's a good thing.
The House of Lords is very much, a lot of people don't understand what the House of Lords is. They see it as a bunch of people not elected, don't do a lot, sit there, have a bit of a natter, fall asleep sometimes.
Claim their daily allowance.
Yeah, walk in, claim it, go back out again. But it does play an important part, because it is like a safety buffer between what the government wants to do and what the government should be allowed to do. So you've been in the House of Lords since 2014, I believe?
That's right. I went in 4 days after Paul died on the 28th of October.
And what was that like walking? I've been in the House of Lords. We had a tour, and neither house was sitting, so we actually went into the House of Lords, and it's tiny compared to what you think it's going to be. It's a really small place. But what was it like when you got the phone call that you were going to be made a Lord, and then your first time in the House of Lords? Was it like, what am I doing?
Well, it's in the book, so I won't give it away, but I will tell listeners this, that Paul and I were in New York, a place that we loved to go, and we were off there to see Ian McKellen on Broadway, and then my phone rang, the mobile, and it was the leader of the Labour Party's political assistant. I thought, now they know I'm away, this must be serious. And that's when I got the call. That's when I was told that they wanted to put me in. They were putting 3 people in. going in just after Paul died was incredible. I've never known such kindness, such warmth. Everyone was so brilliantly supportive. And there's a moment again that I record in the book where I'm stood there in my fake ermine, just about to take the oath, and you see it. There's a video of it, and I look up, and there in the gallery there's Barbara Windsor and Ian McKellen and June Brown and Michelle Collins, all of my friends and my family. And the one face that isn't there is Paul. And then suddenly I think of him, and this amazing smile breaks out on my face. I wasn't sure what to expect about working there. But because I worked in the European Parliament for 15 years, it's not dissimilar, Ian, in that you have to work cross-party.
Yeah.
Because no one party has a majority. So unless you work cross-party, you won't get anything done. It's great that it's not elected, and I'll tell you why. Because it has an independence. Yes, it needs reform. I think it should be, part of the House should be appointed, and the other part of the House should be indirectly elected. So that means, let's say you're the leader of Stoke-on-Trent Council. That means for a duration of your time in office, and after, you get to serve in the House of Lords, because independence is crucial. You've got to do what you believe to be right, not looking over your shoulder or whether you're going to get re-elected because of it. Because what we do in the Lords is we revise the legislation, and then we send it back to the House of Commons to consider. It will then come back to us, and if we're so minded, we'll send it back again. But finally, the last say is with the House of Commons. We've done some things that I'm really, really proud of. And one in particular, you know, we've improved the law. You couldn't pay for the work that some of the law lords do on legislation. But I remember we had a fight with the government, David Cameron's government, and George Osborne, when they wanted to make £4 billion of cuts to the poorest in society.
It always seems to be the way, doesn't it? It's always the poor that seem to bear the brunt.
Now, interestingly, because the government wanted to get it through quickly, they didn't choose a finance bill. If they'd chosen a finance bill, the House of Lords can't touch it. They chose something else. We could. We amended it. We sent it back minus the 4 billion cuts. We were told that if we did that, we would lose our privileges. And one senior lord said, I can think of no better way to lose privilege than by standing up for those who have none. And we sent it back, and the government thought again and got rid of those cuts. Equally, me working on this piece of legislation, widening the conviction, the disregards of convictions and pardons, again, coming out of the House of Lords, and we do some pretty amazing and crucial stuff, particularly when legislation can get rushed through from the House of Commons. And you and Colin should come and visit it when it's sitting. Post-COVID times, I'll show you around, and who knows, I might even be able to get some money together for a glass of wine.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Right, sorry, I've just got my tick list of stuff I wanted to do. Where are we?
Do you want me to be quicker with the answers?
No. This I like. This is the whole idea of this, is to get it, just let people to give the answers that they want to give. It's nothing worse when someone's given an answer and someone goes, yeah. Can you stop? I need to. Because obviously at Drag Race UK, I love Drag Race UK. I think it's wonderful. And we're thinking of doing, I've always wanted to try drag in the proper full makeup, big hair, all of that. Damien, straight as anything, but is camp as anything, but he wants to do it. And we've now persuaded Darren, who I think is going to have nightmares about it, to do it as well. So, yeah, we are going to try and do that in some event.
Because the great thing about an actor an actor's life, is that you get paid to wear makeup, dress up, and go on stage. You probably never saw Ian McKellen do drag as Widow Twankey. Oh, it ranks as the best. And when he comes on in tight white lycra, in drag as Widow Twankey, a sight to behold.
I think some of those drag artists on Drag Race UK are just like, they are amazing. They look stunning, absolutely stunning.
I used to, a drag artist I knew in the 60s. He was character drag, Mrs. Shufflewick, and he was like an old Cockney cleaner, and they, you think now some of them have to go to bed made up because they wouldn't have enough time to wake up and get made up. I mean, yeah. It's like a work of art. But no, I prefer the the character drag. Auntie Flo at the Black Cap, Mrs. Shufflewick.
My first ever drag experience was when I went to my first ever gay bar in Blackpool, and we went to Stella Artois.
Oh yes,
in Blackpool, and I just, as soon as I walked in, I was like, oh my god, that's just amazing, because you can get away with so much more when you've got a frock and a big wig on.
Was that at Basil's? Or the one on the front, the lady.
Funny Girls. No, yeah. It was. It's just so Funny Girls is sort of there, and it's down, and you go down underneath I think it was in Iceland or something like that. But they sold it, and it just went. The whole place, the whole scene seems to have changed a little bit now. It seems very. I don't know. It's even in the short time I've been going out to clubs and that, it's like it just seems full of hen nights. And it's like, oh, go and have your own place.
Yeah.
Leave this to us. So obviously you were in the House of Lords during the whole of the Brexit debacle, and it was a very tense time, and it was very. But what was that like from inside the Lords and inside Parliament and inside the Westminster? Because from the outside it felt like a proper, not a nice time to be a person working in that building, be it an MP or a Lord, because there was so much anger from and just venom from both sides.
You're right. It was nasty. It was vicious, and it was neither house covered themselves in glory. And what was galling for somebody like me was to witness lies being recorded as facts when they clearly were not. Fighting to retain certain elements of EU law to protect children in divorce cases between the custody rights between EU nationals married to someone from the UK, trying to defend and keep the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which gives certain rights to British people that don't ordinarily arise in other conventions. The government lying and saying those rights are covered elsewhere, whereas at least two were not. And actually, when challenging for human rights or defending human rights, you need more conventions to refer to, not fewer. The fact that people were going to lose freedom of movement, and that people who'd lived here for decades, other EU nationals, sometimes in mixed marriages, suddenly facing the possibility that they and their families were no longer going to be welcome. It was pretty depressing. I haven't given up on Europe. The anti-EUers didn't give up after the referendum of 1975. And so I will campaign and do what I can to put the case for being members of the European Union. We could have made it so much easier. We could have united the country instead of perpetuating the division, which I believe we have with this EU withdrawal agreement.
Do you think I think because of COVID, we've not felt the impact as much as we would have done in a normal time since we've left the EU. Because I think a lot of people will feel it the first time they go abroad on holiday, and they will suddenly realize what that freedom of movement from like an everyday purpose, what that feels like. Do you think we're nowhere near knowing what the true impact of Brexit is on us? And do you think that in 10 years time we'll probably be at the point where people will go, actually, do you know, that was or 20 years time, that was a massive mistake. Let's see if we can join in some way or another again?
Well, I'm obviously going to say this, that I think people will believe it was a massive mistake. You don't become stronger by isolation. My example is, it's a union. If, as an actor, I joined Equity, the actors' union, so that we could put our clout together to achieve much, much more by negotiating together than having to pit one actor against another, always working on improving terms and conditions. Of course, there are actors, taking that example, who their box office, they'll get what they want. But actually, by serving the most, you achieve more by coming together using your clout. I think COVID, the restrictions that we've dealt with in terms of travel, COVID has prevented us from seeing the real impact of leaving the European Union, not only in terms of freedom of movement, but freedom of goods from tariffs. We're seeing tariffs being placed on things where people order them over the internet. They come in from let's say a site in Dusseldorf, and suddenly you have to pay a tariff. People in Northern Ireland are seeing part of the impact. I have certainly noticed in the supermarkets that the price of food has gone up considerably, and the shelves are not as well packed as they used to be. But I hope we come through this and make a positive decision about Europe, not based on solely our needs, but based on our aspirations also about the kind of outward-looking country that we want to be.
So Michael's book, one of them, From Albert Square to Parliament Square, is out now in paperback in all good bookshops, independent bookshops. Support your independent bookshops.
And it's also in all naughty bookshops as well. No,
I remember the first time I went to London and went to Soho. I was quite late coming out. I was 30, so I did it all in sort of like a very short space of time. I went to my first gay bar. I went to my first Pride. I went to Soho in London, and walking into those shops, and you sort of walk around and you're like,
Ian, I don't know what you're talking about. I went to Soho when I was 12 years old. It was around the corner from the theatre that I worked in 1963. So, my God, I saw it every single working day of the week for me.
I always imagine a gay club as being, how am I going to put this? Quite dingy and dark and sort of intimate and full of smoke and full of all of that sort of thing. I went when it's all quite polished and it's all quite family friendly and that sort of thing. And it's I think I've missed that.
I'll have to read my book to get the descriptions of what those bars were like in the 60s, traveling around the country on tour and then coming back to London and going to the first gay coffee dance bar. Oh, wonderful.
I've heard my partner Colin is older, is 18 years older than me, so I've heard a lot of stories about what it used to be like, that's for certain. Michael, thank you so much for joining us on the interviews and for being here. It's been a great pleasure and a really good discussion and interview. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a chat. It's not been an interview. It's been lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. And that is it for the first episode of the interviews. Thank you so much to Lord Michael Cashman for his time. A really good interview and discussion. I hope you agree. If you want to find out more about the podcast, head over to thestreammedia.co.uk and follow the links on there. And we will be back again next Friday with an episode with Darren Antrobus speaking to the social media sensation, The Bold Builders. So click on that follow and subscribe button right now to never miss an episode of The Interviews. The Interviews is a The Stream Media production.